Hello, this is Felicity speaking to you from my library, and I'm going to try something a little different this evening. I have a couple of things I've been reading recently. One is the whole essays of Montaigne, and I just finished reading a really huge one, which was the Apology for Raymond Savant, which was kind of tough going and not short. It was well over 200 pages. But after that, there's another essay which is very, very typical of Montaigne, and I thought I would try something different and read it out loud. See what happens. It's maybe dreadful. We shall find out. Anyway, the one that I'm going to read is chapter 13 from volume 2, and it is called On Judging the Death of Others. When we judge the steadiness of men in dying, which is unquestionably the act most worth noticing in human life, one thing must be heeded, that we do not easily believe that we have reached that point. Few persons die convinced that it is their last hour, and there is no occasion when the delusion of hope assails us more. It does not cease dinning into the ear. Others have surely been sicker than you without dying. Your case is not so desperate as they think, and at worst, God has often performed greater miracles. And this occurs because we account ourselves too important. It seems as if the universality of things were to some extent affected by our being brought to naught, and were in sympathy with our condition. For as much as our vision, changed from what it was, sees things likewise changed, and we believe that they are failing it, in proportion as it is failing them. Like those who travel by sea, in whose eyes the mountains, fields, towns, sky, and land move, and at the same rate as themselves. We sail forth from the harbor, and lands and cities recede. Who ever saw an old man who did not extol the past and decry the present, holding the world and the morals of mankind responsible for his wretchedness and his discontent? And now the aged ploughman shakes his head and sighs, and when he compares present times with times past, he often praises his father's fortune and prates about the men of old, rich in piety. We drag everything along with us. Whence it follows that we deem our death a weighty matter, and that it does not take place very simply, or without the solemn consultation of the stars. So many gods excited regarding one man. And we think so the more highly we value ourselves. How can so much learning be lost with such great detriment without special heed taken by the fates? Does so rare and exemplary a mind cost no more in the killing than a commonplace and useless one? This life which covers so many other lives, upon which so many other lives depend, which employs so many people in its service and fills so large a place, is it cast out of its place like that which holds us by its single tie? No one of us sufficiently feels that he is only himself. From this sprang the words of Caesar to his pilot, words more turgid than the waves that threatened him. If you shrink from Italy under the authority of heaven, go thither by my authority. Your just ground for timidity is only that you know not who is your passenger. Dash through the storm, confident in my protection. And these, Caesar now believed the peril to be worthy of his destiny. Is it, he said, so mighty a task for the gods to overthrow me? Does it need so great a sea against this man sitting in a little work? And that general delusion that the sun veiled its face in mourning a whole year for his death? Even he, when Caesar was slain, had pity on Rome and veiled his luminous head with solemn observances. And 1,000 similar ones by which the world allows itself to be so easily deceived, believing that our interests affect heaven, and that its infinitude is concerned with paltry doings. Not so close is the relation between heaven and us, that our mortality is that also of the brightness of the stars. Now, to decide that there is resolution and firmness in him who does not yet believe himself to be certainly in danger, however the fact may be, is not reasonable. and it is not enough that he dies in that attitude, since he assumed it to produce precisely this effect. It occurs with the greater number of men that they strengthen their bearing and their words in order to gain esteem thereby, which they hope to possess while still living. Of all those whom I have seen die, chance has disposed their bearing not to their own purpose. And even regarding those persons who in old days made way with themselves, there is much to discriminate, according as it was by a sudden or a lingering death. That cruel Roman emperor said of his prisoners that he wished to make them feel death, and if one of them killed himself in prison, he said, "That man has escaped me." He desired to stretch death out, and thus to cause it to be felt by torture. We have seen a body slashed all over, but not given the mortal stroke, and prevented from dying by horrible methods of severe cruelty. In truth, it is no very difficult matter, when sound in body and composed in mind, to determine to kill oneself. It is very easy to swagger before coming to close quarters, so that the most effeminate man on earth, Heliogabalus, amid his basest debaucheries, carefully planned to put himself to death in a delicate way, when the emergency should drive him to it. And to the end that his death might not belie the rest of his life, he built, for the express purpose, a costly tower from which to leap, the lower part and the front of which was sheathed with boards enriched with gold and precious stones, wherewith to strangle himself. And also he had cords of gold and crimson silk made wherewith to strangle himself, and a sword of gold forged to run himself through, and kept poison in caskets of emeralds and topaz, to poison himself according as the desire should come upon him, to choose from among all these ways of dying. Prompt and courageous from necessity. But as for him, the effeminacy of his preparations makes it more probable that his heart would have failed him had he been brought to the reality. But even of those who, more stout of heart, have been undaunted in performance, we must examine, I say, whether it was done with a blow which gave no time to feel its effect, for it may be questioned whether, upon seeing life ebb away little by little, the sensations of the body commingling with those of the soul, if the means of repenting had presented itself, there would have been found steadfastness and persistence in so perilous a purpose. In Caesar's civil war, Lucius Domitius, taken prisoner in the Abruzzi, having poisoned himself, afterward repented of the act. It has happened in our day that a certain man, having resolved to die, and at his first attempt not having struck deep enough the sensitiveness of the flesh, stayed his arm, wounded himself twice or thrice again very severely, but could never force himself to drive the blow home. When Plautius Silvanus was under trial, Urgulania, his grandmother, sent him a dagger, with which, not having the courage to kill himself, he had his servants cut his veins. In the time of Tiberius, Albusula, trying to kill herself, struck too gently, and gave her enemies an opportunity to imprison her and put her to death in their way. The same did Demosthenes after his defeat in Sicily, and C. Fimbria, having struck himself too feebly, prevailed on his servant to dispatch him. And so on. This is Montaigne. He doesn't take too much time talking about it. This is one of his more maybe gloomy, because he actually was trying to prepare himself for dying, and dying in a reasonable way, not hoping not to die. He was living in the time which we'd call the War of Religion in France, which is absolutely dreadful. It was 30 years, and it was bloody, brutal. It was the man against man, brother against brother. It was a purely dreadful time. I think he died in the 1580s, about 3 years before the end of the War of Religion. So most of his adult life was actually lived during this time, and he had a lot of experience seeing how that was going on, and wrote about everything he saw. But despite all of these very dreadful and tumultuous events that were going on around him, he still took time to state how much he deplored the brutality that men had. They call it a name of religion, but in fact it was just brutality. Some people were religiously moved, but certainly even more were moved by the need to hurt other people. So there you go. I did not read it all the way through because it gets worse and worse. It gets he's very matter of fact, but he he certainly ends his essay with a couple of some of the more notorious and notable suicides. The one I kind of liked very much, though, was this one that I had just been coming to, which was, he says of somebody went to their execution or dying, they said the being dead did not distress them, but very much the dying. I do not wish to die, but to be dead, make no account of. This is a degree of firmness which I have found by experience I could attain to, like those who throw themselves into danger as to into the sea, but with eyes shut. There is nothing, to my mind, more resplendent in the life of Socrates than the living, for having 30 long days meditated upon his death sentence, the having accepted it all that time with a very confident hope, without excitement, without change, and with a succession of deeds and words rather lowered and careless in tone than strained and heightened by the weight of such a cogitation. The other little tiny work that I was going to read. So this is late Renaissance, 15. I think he was born in the early 1500s, died in the late 1500s, and was a man of relative wealth and ease. Had a family. There was a lot of misery in his life. There was also a lot of joyful things, and he had developed through a very curious education, not stoic, but semi-stoic, but humanistic view of life, which is still, even to this day, fascinating and quite amazing. The other excerpt I wanted to read was a poem that you'll recognize by a poet that you're all going to recognize. It's Percy Bysshe Shelley, who was definitely a romantic poet, a romantic. He died young, he wrote many things. He wrote some things that were not quite so amazing, but here's a little one I'll tell you at the end if you haven't guessed it before. But this is actually from a really, really, really sweet collection that I was given, thank you, Richard. Mark Richardson, sorry about that, it's late in the evening. He gave me a set of these wonderful poems ranging from the late 800s to what was in contemporary, which would have been the early 1900s. And this one goes like this. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a scattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive stamped on these lifeless things. The hand that mocked them and the heart that fed, and on the pedestal these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. So, anyway, thank you, Mark. This is really lovely little book I've got. You can see in the background. You can see actually there on the other side of me. There you can see the whole set. There's a little hole where the one I'm reading is, and that's my poetry shelf, by the way. You can see to my right. You can see a piece of my Loeb library. I'm going to have a little dissertation on that. I'm going to have a little show and tell of my beautiful green and red sometime. But until then, I will leave you with those 2 poems this poem and the essay by 2 very, very fine writers, very far apart in time. And thank you for watching. This is Felicity. I am speaking from my library. Bye-bye.